Okay.
Okay, well, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks. I want to say thank you to Connie again for providing the opportunity. As she started doing her own, um, YouTube sharing channel, and I guess with in conjunction with Gaia, and she talked about Audley Allison a few times, and people asked who was he, and she asked me if I would give that initial talk, and then I've just kind of expanded on it and continue to do that, and then posting stuff on Facebook and uh, other places. And we're working, some of us are working on a website dedicated to Audley and Audley's teaching, at least as we perceive it and experience it. But um, this, last time I spoke, it was more about the lower kingdom, and the lower kingdom has different components to it. But this time, I wanted to talk maybe a little more about what we oddly called the upper kingdom. And I think as I come to describe them in a lot of the traditions, it's the subtle and the causal realms. And where the lower kingdom is primarily the physical world that we know. And I always like to start with a little picture of Audley, and they're interspersed throughout. But as we try to understand these things, and if you have an interest to wake up or to know the inner self more clearly, that's what these lectures are designed for. And in some cases, I would say they get a little technical, and some people don't care as much for that. But I think they're useful to try to understand where we fit. And this is something that I always put up. Seek truth in meditation, not in moldy books. Look into the sky to see the moon, not in the pond. Oddly encouraged me to keep that mindful. And then also a quote from Yogananda. He always said, read a little, meditate more, and think of God all the time. And that's the best way to get to enlightenment. And I thought one of the things we wanted to do, I've been hoping to do a sort of a brief centering meditation when we start these sessions. And I often get too excited and just start talking and forget about the meditation. Connie suggested I put in a slide that says brief centering meditation. I thought that was a great idea. It helps me. So when I advance through the slides, I see it. The thing I would like to do today, there's a mantra, Asato Ma Sadgayama, and basically that translates into Om. Lead us from unreality to the reality. Lead us from the darkness to the light. Lead us from the fear of death to the knowledge of immortality. Om, peace, 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 or Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. There's a nice version of it. There's a link here. And again, I'll make these slides as soon as we get a place to host them. They'll be posted, and you can do it. But I'll jump to the slide here. And I'd like you to just take a breath. And can everybody hear that? Just take your breath, centering yourself at the top of the head. You can watch the screen, or you can just listen to the sound. And this is 2 or 3 minutes of helping you to center and go into yourself.
मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मा अमृतं गमय.
And if you come back into normal awareness, hopefully that helps and you were able to hear it. And I find it very useful. And then I think once we get centered, there's a few concepts that I would like to kind of work with and address. And the concepts are things that you may have seen in other formats, but one is look a little bit at how our mind works. And it's called a selective attention test. Again, it's another YouTube clip, but it's what we want to do is when you watch this and follow the instructions, we'll pause a second, and then you'll get to see it. But the little 2 or 3 minutes of video will show you a lot about how attention works and how that the world that we see, or your attention, determines the world you see, that you feel, and you experience. And if you are directed to focus on something, or if you have a belief system or an idea about what you think reality is, what you think the structure of the world is, then you will be tied into that, and that may be all that you see, and you may miss lots of other features. So let's look at this a second and see if we.
Ben,
This is a test of
Ben,
Yeah,
you need
selective
to
attention.
stop. Ben,
yeah,
pause for a
yeah.
second.
Okay.
Um, Zoom doesn't go to a YouTube video from a PowerPoint because you're sharing the PowerPoint, and that's a separate screen from where the YouTube pops up. So
Okay.
it doesn't just switch to the YouTube video. You're going to have to call the YouTube video up by itself as a separate screen share if you want to show a video.
Okay, so I would need to stop the
Active,
existing,
activate the video,
activate the video. Okay,
then go to stop screen share,
okay,
then go to start screen share again, and it's going to give you that option as one of the screens to share,
okay.
and then share that screen.
Thank you. Now, are you seeing the screen that says instructions, count how many times the players wearing the white pass the basketball?
Yes, we're now seeing the YouTube
Okay,
channel.
thanks. I didn't realize that. So you taught me something else today. I appreciate it. This is just a little exercise in your attention, but there's one of the things that you want to do. There's several people. I think there's 6 of them in the video, and they have basketballs that they're throwing back and forth. And the instruction is to count how many times the players that are wearing the white pass the basketball. So let's start
Count
it.
how many times the players wearing white pass the basketball. How many
Okay, were you able to see people passing basketballs back and forth? And if you did and you counted, how many passes did you get?
I had people locked out of talking. Now they can all unmute if they want.
Okay, no, it's okay. We'll rather than try to do that, we'll just people either write down or think to yourself how many passes, and then let's watch the rest
Did you
of it.
count? The correct answer is 15 passes. But did you see the gorilla? This video is from research by Daniel Simons and Christopher Shabr.
I'll stop that, share, go back to the other one. Now, maybe if you could unmute everybody just a second. I'm curious if what people's reaction was or what they saw, what they learned.
People can unmute themselves as they
Okay.
I counted 12 passes, but I didn't see a gorilla the first time.
That's quite common. At least 50 to 60% of the people have.
Only 10 passes and no gorilla.
Yeah.
Yes, same here.
I counted
12 pass. Oh, go ahead.
I counted 13, but I did see the gorilla. I saw something move by, and I when it went out, I thought it must be a gorilla.
Okay, well, that's very
Ben?
useful. I think, I'm happy that people saw it, and the real thing that, to get from it or to see from it is that your attention, what you're focused on, often filters out a great deal around you. And I know when I'm very intent on either meditation or working on a presentation or an email, a letter, something like that, I can literally shut out all the world around me. I often work in coffee shops and places like that where it's quite noisy, and but I can focus completely. But when your attention or you use the mind in that way, you miss quite a lot of the world, and you filter it. And if you have a specific idea or view about how you think the world is, and one of those things that we're all kind of locked into is thinking that we are our physical body, and that's what our true consciousness or true reality is the physical body, and we think that's all we are. And when a teacher comes along and says, let's meditate, or let's go into the subtle realms, let's experience a different world, we simply turn on our filter and we don't see anything, or we sit quietly and we say, oh my God, there's so many things in my mind. I think about my work, I think about the hamburgers, I think about, oh, my mom wanted me to do that, and or we feel guilty about something or shame, but we do other things, and then so we miss what we're trying to see. And what I'm hoping that you can take away from some of this is that by changing the focus of attention, it can change a lot in your mind, and it can change the reality that you see, or it can improve your meditation a great deal because you focus in a different way. And then this second one, I know some of you have seen it before because I was there many years ago when we looked at this in a little different format, but I think I have to select the video, stop the share.
Perhaps you've seen this puzzle. There are 9 dots on a page, arranged in a 3x3 matrix. Now, the challenge is to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines or fewer without lifting your pencil or retracing your path. Now, if you haven't done it before or it's been a while, give it a try. Pause. Get out a piece of paper and a pencil and give it a shot.
Let me kind of restart.
Perhaps you've seen this puzzle. There are 9 dots on a page, arranged in a 3x3 matrix. Now, the challenge is to connect all 9 dots with 4 straight lines or fewer without lifting your pencil or retracing your path. Now, if you haven't done it before or it's been a while, Give it a try. Pause the video, get out of.
Now, if it's really an interesting experience, and if you don't have a piece of paper and a pencil, it's no big deal. But if you take the instructions that are there, and he'll show some examples of how people typically do it, and how it seems like at first it's an impossible task, but again, by changing your perception or changing the way your attention looks at a particular situation, you can find solutions. And I'll pause just a second in case anyone's working on it. But it's kind of a fun thing to see how the mind works. And I know the first time I ever saw this, I spent 30 minutes or so and was unable to find a solution. And then once I saw a solution or was shown a solution, I never did see it on my own. I saw it again a few years later and I couldn't remember the solution. This is often like a peak experience that we might have when sitting with Audley or in a meditation or at a retreat or in a situation. We have that experience at one point, but then it doesn't encode in our memory. It doesn't become a permanent part of our consciousness or awareness. And so we go back to it over and over.
Piece of paper and a pencil and give it a shot. Now come back when you're done. Okay, not as simple as it looks, is it? Now, before I show you the solution, let's look at the solutions most people try first. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that gets all but one. Well, you knew that wouldn't work, right? I mean, that'd be too easy. Now, how about a crisscross pattern? No, that doesn't work either. Zigzag. No, maybe start in the middle. No. Oh, triangles. How about triangles? Oh, that's awful. You know, this would be a lot easier if we could just relax one of the conditions. You know, if you could use 5 lines instead of 4, or if you could pick up your pencil or maybe retrace your steps, then it'd be easy. There are just too many constraints. In fact, maybe it's not even possible. Well, how about this? Instead of getting rid of the constraints, what if we added one more constraint? And it sounds counterintuitive, and it is, but let's see what happens when we do. Let's add a 4th constraint that all of your lines have to be inside this box. Now, at first that doesn't look like help, right? All your lines were already inside that box. But when most people attempt this problem the first time, they restrict themselves to the perimeter of the 9 dots. They stay inside an imaginary box that they imposed on themselves. And then, try as they might, there's just no legitimate solution in that box, at least not one I've found. The only legitimate solutions are found once you give yourself license to extend your lines outside the imaginary box you were thinking in. Once you do that, several creative solutions quickly come to mind. The most popular one looks like this. And then some people draw fatter dots and make a solution that looks like this. Humans need some frame of reference to think within. And if you don't give them one, they'll construct one for themselves. So the way to get people to solve problems like this quicker isn't to tell them, think outside the box. It's to draw them a bigger box. When you do that, you force them to consider the space outside the smaller box.
I'll stop that share and go back to this share. Now, again, if you could unmute yourself, if you've seen this before and you remember, have a great memory and you remember how to do it, that's fantastic. But if you play with it a little bit, you find that often the restraints or the restrictions that we place in our own mind about what we're capable of, like I talk to people about meditation and about these topics almost daily, and I'm always amazed at how many people, well, the first thing they do is they start telling me their assumptions and their restrictions. And they say, oh, I can't do that. We don't have enough money and there's no way we could do that. How the government's kind of on our case and they're screwing us, or, there's some limitation. Something is keeping me from living in tune with the divine self, in full awareness of the divine self, and in an abundance flow. And sometimes that's described as, we easily get locked into poverty mentality. We think there's not enough in the world, and that, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, they've cornered all the money in the world, but that they haven't. That's a restriction that we apply because we don't think we're worthy, we don't think we're capable, we don't think it's possible, or it doesn't exist in the 9 dots that we've set up and in the self-restricted box. So it's a good thing to kind of learn. And then on this one, I just would like for you to focus on the screen for a second and see what comes. Now, when you went through that, is there anyone that saw anything other than a coiled rope? Again, this is an exercise in your attention, and if you blinked at the wrong time, you probably only saw a coiled rope.
I saw like a hair.
A hair. Anybody see anything else? Rope and a hair.
It reminded. Ooh.
That's a cool sound.
It reminded me of a snake.
Ah, well then you probably saw this image that was stuck in the midst of all the coiled rope. And
Ooh.
This is a friendly snake, but it's the sort of things that that happen. And the reason I stick this in again is to show that our attention, a lot of people say when we come to the subtle realms or the inner kingdom or the upper kingdom, when we come to that, it's very subtle, and sometimes it happens in a fleeting impression, and that's mostly because of our attention. If we haven't developed good concentration, we're not able to hold those images in the subtle realm for long enough for them to really register in our mind. And there's a famous story that shows up in Buddhism and the Hindu text and stories also about the you're placed in a room that's it only has a small light and it's dark. It's really a dark room with like a 10-watt bulb or maybe a candle in one corner. And as you move around, sometimes you hear something, or sometimes you see a glimmer of something in the corner, and at first you think, well, maybe it's just a coiled rope, and then your DNA kicks in, and we're genetically hardwired to be fearful of snakes because they bite us and kill us, and they often surprise us. And so, you start thinking, well, maybe it's a snake. And so you don't go into that part of the kingdom or that part of the world or anything out of fear. But then, your teacher comes in the room and says, well, how's your meditation going? And the student says, well, I haven't been able to meditate. I'm afraid of the snake in the corner. And the teacher just laughs and turns on the light for the room and says, that's nothing but a coil of rope. And what the analogy is, it's kind of like when you're dreaming. When you wake up, sometimes you have a dream and it's just unbelievably real and more intense than real life. But in that dream, when you wake up, you have the awareness that, oh, wow, thank God I was only dreaming. But that difference between being in the dream and being awake and said, oh, wow, the tiger didn't eat me. Or like the dream I had, and I posted on Facebook just the other day, I had a dream just a few days ago, and in the dream, I was back in Oklahoma City, and it was this beautiful crystal cathedral that was about 20 miles in diameter on the base, and that was this energy had formed in Oklahoma City. And in my dream, there was one person that I was talking to, and they said, oh yeah, don't you know, Oklahoma City is the spiritual center of the United States. And I thought, wow, this is really, really something. And but all this was happening in a dream, and then I woke up. And then I thought, wow, now that's a dream I'd like to continue. But we go through that, and the teaching is to help us become aware of those subtle realms, and in all of the traditions and all of the teaching, like the path of the Holy Nam that Audley was in that lineage through Dr. Thin gave us, is that, when you really come to see the God self or the spiritual self or the divine self, the self with a capital S, that experience is so real that it's just like waking from the dream. And you think, oh my God, how did I think I was that body, that old, it's dilapidated, it has pains, it smells, all this stuff. And I've been thinking I was that my whole life. But now I realize I'm the inner self or the divine self. And I always throw in these little slides about the path of the Holy Nam, the dedication, discipline, ethical living, devotion, and discrimination. And that wasn't all in all of the things that Audley gave us, but it came to be stressed a great deal, that the ability to discriminate and be capable of deep concentration, it helps you to know whether the item in the corner is a snake or is it a coiled rope. And is it something you need to be afraid of? Or once you connect with that divine self and you realize that you're not this body, then there's a new vitality that comes to life. It's almost a fearlessness, and you can move forward with great gusto, and you're no longer afraid you're going to die or anything's going to happen or you're not going to have enough. You know that divine flow that's coming through you gives you what you need. And when you become and live in that awareness, you have a very beautiful life. And the meditation or the internal focus, becoming aware of the energy and listening to the sound current, those are such key parts. In all of the research that's been done by the neurofeedback people and the sociologists, psychologists that study those sorts of things, says that the only thing they've really found that moves people through different levels of awareness or levels of development, stages of development, is meditation. And they say that, practicing a course of meditation over 2 to 5 years typically moves you up in 2 levels of awareness and understanding. On average, some will come completely into the God awareness, but it will raise your level of awareness in how you perceive the world and the self. And some of the ways that expresses is that you end up, seeing that all the stuff that's going on around you, the world's not falling, the sky is not falling. This isn't the worst time that we've ever been alive, with a pandemic and a political situation and an economy and all that. It shows you a much different perspective when you look at it from a higher level. And then he always said, this quote, and I read it every day. I think I've shared it many times. And he used to give it out on a small sheet of paper. And there's a lot to be learned from it. And it helps me a great deal. And then the lineage that he was in, some call it the lamplighter lineage. It's Audley, Dr. Thin, and then the guys back in India. And there's a lot to be said from that. And then we also, all of us have, experience with Kriya Yoga through Yogananda, through Roy Davis, who shared that technique with Audley, and Audley shared it with us and incorporated it in to all of the teaching. And I still find it to be one of the most powerful teachings for me today. And anytime I'm stressed, out of sorts, not feeling well, I get angry about something, customer service people that sometimes drive me crazy. Then what do? I sit down and run a few Kriyas and work on that. And that Kriya lineage, some of the guys, I like Yukteswar. He's kind of one of my favorites in Babaji, and I think all of us came to have some type of relationship or understanding of Mahayavatar Babaji. And I talked to Roy once, and he told me, after he had shown the Kriya technique to Audley, he immediately bonded with Babaji. And he said, Roy said, I think it was because I was quite a young man at the time, and Audley was already, 25, 30 years older than he was. And he said, it was hard for him to look at me as more than just a teacher that had provided a technique. But when he connected through that flow and that lineage, he was right back to Babaji, and he took us all there often to meditate and be of service in that way. So quite a nice experience. And then always I put this in every talk, don't believe a word I say. If you believe me, you believe any damn fool. That was a direct quote from Audley. He often cleaned up the damn fool and just said you'd believe anybody. But that was in the public setting. In the more private session, he was a little more raucous. And then, wherever possible, I always stick in pictures of these guys. A little bit here, I won't go into detail on the teachings. That'll be another talk. But when we get into it, in the meditation process, there are a few things, and some of us have been working through the beginning meditation text that we had, and I still say to this day, he wasn't particularly pleased with any of the things that we wrote up as students. We didn't have the insight, but he said they're okay. They can be guides for people. But the introduction to that text, the path to union with one's true self is filled with half-truths and created images of the mind. These images of what we think the truth should be are sometimes personal, but are often provided by teachers who believe in and accept their own mental images and created at the personality level of awareness. The goal of meditation and self-illumination, however, lies beyond the imagery of the mind. The techniques and pictures included in the book are roadmaps, which have been handed down to us by the masters, and to safely lead the inquiring soul through the illusions of the mind and matter to light. The masters are beings who have personally lived these instructions and who exist now in both physical and subtle bodies. While they teach from their varied positions in consciousness, they wear no religious labels, for each different path eventually leads to union with the self. Scriptures of all religions contain an element of truth, but we must take care not to become fixed on a particular dogma and instead strive to see the same God that is in every man and woman. I always try to make that more, gender friendly. And then the guidelines on meditation discussed in the booklet help the devoted student to have a personal experience with inner consciousness. Through this experience comes knowledge of reality of the self, capital S, and the not self, what we are and what we are not, and their relationship to soul growth. These teachings can and have been proven to lead an individual into an expanded awareness and conscious experience of his or her own divinity. From this enlightenment, the intuitional faculties of man or woman come into full expression, and he or she is able to know and know that he knows. And Audley often said, not only do you know, but you know. And so it's a true inner awareness. And I use a number of images to help show that these perspectives and how we view the world are often what shapes what we see. Just like with the basketballs, throwing them back and forth, if we're focused on the people in white throwing the ball, then we miss the gorilla that walks in the room. And that aspect of ourself, the divine self, is always present within our awareness. We all have it. We're all an expression of that divine. And images like this show that, here we are floating in space. This is a galaxy that is very similar to the Milky Way galaxy that we live in, but it's, a few 100,000 light years away. And that seems like an impossibly great distance, which it is in terms of anything we could do or communicate. But then these images I find is particularly favorite. It's the Earth and showing the moon in the sky. And then it's the Earth from further in space, looking back at our home. And then it's one of the astronauts that landed on the moon and walked there, took a picture called, it's often referred to as Earthrise, and it's the Earth rising over the surface of the moon. But all these perspectives, many of the astronauts that went, and I've been fortunate to meet a number of them and talk with them personally, many of them, when they get in space and see a perspective like this, it's a spiritual experience for them. It blows their mind. They see that there's no borders, that it's just floating in darkness, and that it's out there in the world. And then when we start looking at what we do see in the physical world, the gross world, the physical plane, often things are not what they seem. And this looks like a little mountain. And then you look at it and you realize that it's not just a little mountain, it's a giant iceberg. They say roughly 10% of the mass is above the waterline, 90% is below. These type diagrams are often used to show how our conscious awareness, we're aware of just a small part of the physical world or the reality in large, in a greater way. And then as we look at some of the studies in quantum mechanics or in special and general theories of relativity, we find that anytime we get close to these boundaries between the worlds, some very strange things happen. And like in Heisenberg uncertainty principle, you can know only two things primarily about an electron that's moving in a free vacuum. And you can know where its position is, you can know exactly where it is, or you can know its momentum or the speed that it's moving, direction it's moving, and things like that. But you can't know both of them at the same time. And the more accurately you know one, the more fuzzy the other one becomes, or indeterminate. And consciousness, especially in the inner realms, is very much like that. You can know it, but you have to kind of sneak up on it. And so a lot of the techniques that we're taught in meditation are techniques that help us to become aware of the subtle world or the subtle levels of awareness. And then this is a slide that interestingly has caused some controversy in my friends from the old Lotus Center days. And it's what I thought, my perception was of what Audley was teaching me was to validate the path of meditation. It's to understand the information, the teaching, to test it. Does it work? Is it accurate? Is it clear? And he didn't want us to test it in an aggressive, critical way that tried to break it down, but test it and apply it in our life in a way that allowed us to improve or increase our awareness. And then if we found errors, correct the information. And a lot of people, I've seen some people now, let's put it that way, that think the drawings are pretty much that he left and the words that he left are pretty much cast in stone. But if you looked at his kingdom drawings, the one that just had the upper and lower kingdom, and then the one that had the great supreme, on those drawings, he was constantly changing them and modifying them, especially in the early days. And if you looked at them, you could see that he was drawing with chalk, the iridescent chalk on the felt paper to try to get it to stand out like it looks in the subtle realms. And he would go in and had a little eraser that would pull all the chalk out, but you could see the pencil line where he had it previously, and he changed it, and especially where the centers were and all that. And so he encouraged me to use the best possible metaphors and analogies to describe the path, to explain it in current scientific, linguistic, and religious terms. Like we've introduced now, we just became aware of neurofeedback and biofeedback when my first experience actually with that came through him taking me to meet one of the astronauts that had been on the moon, Dr. Edgar Mitchell. And he was in Oklahoma City, and Audley took a group of us to see him. And that's ended up, I'm still working with that organization some today. And then in trying to teach, it's hard to make it clear and easy, concise. It's hard to make it accurate and useful drawings or diagrams, maps, illustrations, and tables. I work on that constantly. And some of it, I just throw everything away and try to start over because it's not working. And then we try to incorporate examples of supporting scientific information, like as we learn about the brain states that are correlated to the states of meditation, we add that into the model or into the description. And as we learn more about how the brain functions and how it works and how it can perceive, we learn more. And then in some cases, for me, it's been going back to some of the core root teachings that especially from the Kriya Yoga tradition, the Upanishads, the Yoga Sutras, the Bhagavad Gita, some real core stuff there that shows up also in Dr. Thin's teaching. It's in the Indian tradition, but understanding that better has helped me to simplify it more. And they said a lot of times in the early days when this information was actually being written down, as people began to forget, as we moved into Kali Yuga, they began to forget what it was. And so they started creating languages that they could write down. Prior to that, we could just communicate one-to-one in our mind or to whole groups with project a thought. But as it was written down, they didn't have a lot of paper and stuff, so they did very terse or concise descriptions. They were often handed down as oral traditions, and so something that could be memorized and that you could go over it and over it, like the Yoga Sutras. All that's, you can, I know people that can chant the whole thing in Sanskrit, and they can tell you the whole thing in English. So it does that. But when we start looking at this, we see that there are states of consciousness and stages of consciousness. And the waking state of consciousness, the dream consciousness, and the sleep or deep sleep, no dreams levels, the causal consciousness, where forms are manifest. All of us have access to those all the time. Right now, you're probably in the waking state. You might be touching a little bit on daydreaming, thinking about what you're going to do next. You may have your eyes closed and be meditating and seeing subtle images and realms. And at some point in the next 24 hours, you will probably go to sleep. You may have dreams in part of your sleep in that subtle awareness. And then you have, even my Apple Watch tells me I'm in deep sleep so many hours during each night. And when I'm in deep sleep, no dreams, I don't move. My body, there's a part of our body that becomes paralyzed. Only the eyes are active. And so when the dream raises, the eyes move back and forth, or like you're seeing something, but the rest of your body is in a state of paralysis. And there's a switch in the brain that can just turn that off, and it slows down. It stops the kidneys from functioning, so you don't have to go to the bathroom, stops the bodily functions, all those slow down. And these are states that we can measure and we know a lot about. And then there's the turiya, or the fourth state. It's pure awareness. It's the witness. Whatever state that you're in your waking, your dreaming, or your deep sleep, if somebody, when you're in deep sleep, shakes you and you wake up, you may be upset with them and angry. It's a good test. But you will know that they'll say, well, why didn't you answer the phone? And you say, I was asleep. Well, there's some part of you that knows that you were in that deep sleep, in that state. And then the turiya tita, the true oneness, in that everything is arising. It's what we might think of as the great supreme, and it manifests out of it. The turiya is kind of like the God self, or the Godhead, the oversoul. All those kind of merge together, but those are in the subtle realm. And then in the drawing that Audley's done of the kingdom, he lists the whole thing, and he shows the great supreme, the soul, oversoul, the Godhead, and then all the levels and layers in between. And it's been a real challenge for me to try to, I guess, validate this, because as I came to experience it, my experience was quite different than what's in this drawing. But this is a very good map. When you see this, when I see it, it immediately triggers, I know what it is. But when I try to say, well, what's really going on, I find that the great supreme is really compressed inside the oversoul. And even though it's much larger, and every golden ray that comes out of that expresses as you and me, and we're all an exact image of the divine creation in this subtle kingdom. As it comes into that, it comes from within it. It's like a multidimensional folded layer. And if you've studied anything about quantum mechanics, there's a lot of work that says, there's really not just four dimensions, the normal height, width, depth, and time in space, but there are many other dimensions. And mathematically, some of these models come out and they only exist in a folded way. And so the particles get smaller and smaller, even though it's the whole universe. And it always kind of reminded me of, I think, one of the Men in Black movies. There's a cat named Orion, and Orion is the protector of the universe. And it's actually, the whole universe is contained in the little amulet around the cat's neck. That's on a little collar. And in a sense, that's a more accurate way, from my experience, to show what it is. And then even the oversoul, the Godhead, and all the other levels, I see those much more as just a layer right at the top of the head. And in some of the pictures of the various spiritual teachings, and the Buddha in particular, there's a little knot on top of the head that is 2 or 3 inches tall. And for me, it seems like all that stuff is in there, and going further and further, you're really going more and more into that center. And that's part of my experience of the the inner kingdoms. And we look at that, and if I go from that perspective and I say, okay, with the crown chakra, the top of the head, and then actually inside that is the God awareness, and inside that's the oversoul, and inside that's the great supreme, all in smaller levels. But all of those components end up being the causal realm. And then everything in between, all the centers, is the subtle realm. And then the gross physical realm, it's identified or correlated to the root chakra. And I had in the last lecture several different descriptions of how that functions, and I'll talk more about that in time. But each one of these layers, the interesting thing is the three components, the gross, subtle, and causal, it gives us a picture of what the subtle realms are. And the subtle realms are probably most easily identified with our dream state. And the dream state can be broken into multiple levels, like the astral plane, the etheric plane, the second physical. All those are different aspects or bands of consciousness or awareness within our kingdom. And Audley did some drawings that showed kind of an overall egg shape. And I have a copy of that being recreated right now. What I have as an image was kind of a photograph of the thing sitting sideways, but I'll have that and share it in one of the, it'll be on the Facebook share pages and stuff soon. But those different bands of awareness or consciousness in our egg of consciousness, each one of those is kind of a world into itself. And they're correlated to the various chakras or centers, but all of them are subtle in nature. And when we say subtle, sometimes it's talked about as 5 sheaths or bodies, the physical body being the gross physical form, flesh and blood, the vital force or breath. And one thing that is really highlighted in the Tibetan Buddhist traditions in particular, is that the precious human birth, or the ability to be born and to become conscious in this body, is all tied to that vital force sheath, or the breath coming into the body. And when the breath activates the body, consciousness and awareness comes into this body. And in those traditions, they say very much that only from the human form, only from the breathing conscious awareness, can you have an awareness and a consciousness of the physical world, and you can exist in that, but you can also have the awareness to the highest and into the causal worlds. And I found that to be a very good and useful description. And then the 7 planes of existence, and these tie a little more to the chakras in that, but the pure existence, the Sat, is the causal realm, and that's the Godhead, the Oversoul, the Great Supreme. And you can know which state you're in or which realm you're in by your perception. And we've looked at the perception of the basketball and how easily your perception can be manipulated, to where if you're told or primed to look for one thing, you won't see everything else that's going on. And in a true sense, since the time you were in this world, they've been teaching you how to describe this world. As a baby, you're taught to, when you start learning to use language, they want to make sure you know where your nose is. And they point to their nose and say nose, and they have you do it. And then your elbow and your hand and your mouth, your eyes, all that. But you're conditioned or really manipulated to think that this body is the world. This is the reality. And it's hard to let go of that and to become aware that there is a subtle realm. And then the gross physical, we'll look a little more about that and just another take on it. But what this says is the objects that you see can help you determine what realm you're in and what you're experiencing. And when you look into your world, or when you sit in your meditation, or you wake up in the morning and you walk around, what objects do you see? The objects that you see can help you determine what realm you are in and experiencing. And it's a very useful tool to enhance your meditation, to help you to be aware of what's going on. And what objects do you see in the gross realm? The gross or physical realm has objects, and the objects are on a plane or ground of existence. They actually exist in a form or a frame, and a ground of being, in a sense. And then objects in the gross realm, one thing I've noticed, and I've seen this in some of the other traditions, not all of them, but I noticed that the things in the physical world have shadows, and they do not have a light within them. They have a light that radiates them. The sun shines, I turn on the light, I use the flashlight on my phone. Anytime I turn on any kind of light, a shadow forms, but it requires external illumination. So it's pretty easy to know that you're in the physical world. And I always like this drawing because it shows balance, but it also shows rocks. And if you notice on these, there's little shadows, from the items above them. It blocks the light, and so it has a shadow. And we have our own human shadow, and there's a lot of mythology about that and stories in that area. But it's, if you're in the physical world and you see shadows, you know you're in the physical world. And then what objects do you see in the subtle realm? The subtle realms have objects that are floating in darkness or an empty field and do not have a plane or ground of existence. And when I first, learned about this concept, I thought that's really strange. I don't know if it works. But then I started looking at my own dreams, and in the dreams, like there's people there, but there's no rocks. There's often no chairs. Occasionally an object will appear in a dream, but for the most part, it's me, and it's maybe me. It's like I'm an observer to what's going on, and maybe there's some darkness that's chasing me, or something that's going on. But if you see them, if you see forms in your dreams or in these subtle levels, they all have a light from within, and then they are either thoughts or thought forms, consciousness or being, conscious beings, plants of power. Like some plants, some that have a hallucinogenic or medicinal purposes and stuff, they have their own light, and that's how they're able to transform our consciousness when we ingest them. But when you are in the subtle realms, and if you can activate your consciousness and look in that, you can find those. And there are some beings that go and harvest the plants, and they usually have procedures, and they have protocols, and you talk to the plant, you tell them what you're doing, you don't frighten them, you don't cut them, you don't hurt them, you do it in a way that's beneficial for both. And in general, though, if you can see them or see other things in the subtle realms, they can see you. And so you need to exercise care in dealing with what you don't know or understand. And sometimes curiosity kills the cat, or can certainly get you in a lot of trouble, as I've had experiences over time. And then there's some general guidelines. What objects do you see? And this is a good example of the gross realm. Are there any rocks? And if they are, do they have shadows? To have a shadow, you have to have the external light, sun, moon, flashlight on your phone, whatever. And then can you take pictures of them? If yes, then you're in the gross realm. Are they floating in space or laying on the ground? If floating, you should file for a patent or run, because you're in the subtle realm and you don't know what's going to happen next. And seeing a rock in the subtle realm can sometimes be a little frightening. It's usually a power object that someone has energized. And do they glow with a light from within? If yes, is there any ground beneath them? No. Or yes. They're an object of power that someone has energized or blessed. It might be laying on the ground. You pick it up and you feel their fear. Maybe they were holding it when they were dying. Or you pick it up and it makes you feel wonderful. It was blessed by a saint. Maybe it was his staff. It was an object, a holy object, or one that carries intense power. And then, yes, is there any ground beneath them? No. Okay, they're an object with self-consciousness or awareness. They can bestow power, or they can take your consciousness, energy, or power. If you cannot discriminate what they are, it's best to leave them alone. Just put them back, bury them, do something. And then if there's no light within, you're in the physical or gross realm. And if you kick it when you're in the physical world, you will say, ouch, and your toe will hurt. Be careful where you walk. And these are just kind of some rules of thumbs or guidelines to help you know what realm you're in. And then what happens in the causal realms? Do you see any objects? If the answer is yes, then you're not in the causal realm. You're simply not in that awareness. The causal realm is beyond duality, beyond existence of form. And if you see objects, do the objects have shadows? Then you're in the gross realm. If the objects are on more of a virtual or subtle level, then you may see the self-illuminating light. It looks like got an error in the slide. I'll fix that. And you can often know what realm or what level that you're in. And so it comes back, the guru yoga, it's a map or a tool that can help us enhance our states of consciousness to wake up. The stages of consciousness are more like growing up, but it's our awareness of what happens. And states of consciousness are free. Everybody has them. Babies have them, dogs have them, cats have them. They all dream, they have some experience, they all sleep. They go into a deep non-experienced state, and they all play around in the physical world, and that we get hurt ourselves or we enjoy it. And stages, though, are earned. You have to build that performance, and you cannot peak above the level. Like sometimes if you're in states of consciousness, you will have an experience. You can be very tired, fatigued, and you will have a state change in consciousness. When I was 18, 19 years old, I began to, when I was tired, if I'd lay down to go to sleep, I would come out of my body in a full conscious awareness of a lucid dream or an experience in the subtle realm. Those can sometimes peak, but they're not lasting. Sometimes when you're in the presence of a teacher or a guru, the consciousness will move to the most elevated state. You'll have this divine, blissful feeling of oneness when you're in their presence. And you keep going back, you fall in love with it and you want to do it. And one of the beauties of the traditions is that you have a lineage that that is connected back through time. So it has more of, I guess, safety valves in it. It's a solid teaching that can be repeated, can be transmitted, can be given to a student, and it can help them to move forward. So it's more like guidepost or signs along the path. And then altered states, when you get into an altered state, either through meditation, drug-induced experience, fatigue, traumatized, all those, they can lead to permanent traits, and it can be positive or negative. It can be uplifting and enlightening. Peaking experiences generally lead to improvements in stages, or it can also be a move backward or downward in consciousness. It's sometimes like a Darth Vader move. You hit a peak experience, everything's fine, and then you get really fascinated by the dark Sith Lord, and you start thinking, he knows the truth, and you start following that. But you can look at the ethical components to it. Are you hurting people or helping people? And so you can kind of know where you are. But at any stage that we get to, when there's stages of consciousness, you can revert or go back. And what I have seen is that a lot of times people will have very traumatic experiences in their life, and they simply withdraw. They pull back in. They may become more protective, more aggressive to those around them, more fearful in some ways, but they move down a level in their awareness simply out of a survival instinct. And so it can be very useful. And then we come back, we've got the states of consciousness, the same thing, a gross, subtle, the deep sleep, the pure awareness, the Godhead. Each one of these states, again, you have them all. They exist in you right now. And in some sense, teachers often say, well, you don't even need to meditate. All you need to do is remember what you are, is to have the awareness of the Atman, or the God self, the soul, and it's with you all the time. And because your attention has been distracted, you have picked up some misinformation or disinformation, or you simply identified with being in the physical form rather than being in the divine form. So all you need to do to wake up is just, shake your head a little bit and realize what you are. But we get stuck. And so the tools of meditation, of practices in ethical living, and all those things to help us move through the subtle kingdoms into the causal kingdom, into the pure awareness. That's why we have teachers, and that's why it's essential in the way that we do it. And I'm working on some drawings, trying to say, okay, if this is the Great Supreme and that, for me, it looks like it's right at the top of my head, but the Great Supreme is actually inside of the Oversoul. The Oversoul is actually inside of what we would see as the Godhead. And all of that is right at the top of the head, just in a small area of consciousness. And that's what I see as the subtle realm. And I'm kind of like a bird in the forest. I only sing one song. And I ask people, what kind of chirping bird are you? I think I'm more in the blue jay and the crow area, where it makes, kind of harsh sounds. Some people sing beautiful songs. And then people say, well, what's all the fuss about the maps and the reality or the territory? Well, we're trying to wake up, trying to find out what we truly are. And that's pretty much, I think where I would bring it to. So I think we're about on time. Try to do an hour or so. I'll turn it back to Connie. Maybe you can turn off that. We can take a short break, and then if people have questions or would like to know more about these things, I'm happy to spend time sharing and answering questions.
Okay. Questions, anyone?
Well, I guess I have a question. This is Liz. Are you familiar with Eckhart Tolle?
Yes.
And do you practice any of his teachings as far as in the witness and being present with reality as is? You spoke a lot about the mind,
right,
and
no,
and not letting trick you, basically. But
yeah, no,
yeah.
very much. And his teaching, as well as the mindfulness teachings that are taught by a number of the Zen or more Tibetan practices, I find them all very useful. I have read several of Tolle's works and practiced some of it, and say, this is a guy that's enlightened. He's expressing his kingdom or his message in a way that's relevant to him, and because of his life experience, it's clearly it helps many people. And if they practice what he says, what he recommends, they come to a state that I would say is enlightened or greatly aware of what it is. It's a different tradition than what we were taught, with Audley. And there's a lot of those out there that don't emphasize the role of the guru or the teacher as much. They say that, they fully empower you and your reference. And some of it's just historically, a lot of us were tied into lineages and traditions. And so we continue to do that. But I've met people all around the world and from various traditions, and some, just going out in nature, they open up, they become fully illuminated. If you see them in the subtle realms, they're as brilliantly lit up and full of light as anyone that you would meet. And so there's lots of ways to get there. I know Audley often said, there's as many paths to know God as there are people. And so I think it's good to keep that in mind. And one of the red flags, and I'm going to do a lecture just on teachers and gurus in a few weeks. But if a teacher is thinking they have the only way or teaching that, it's usually a more restricted or I would say a lower level of awareness that's not all encompassing. And as they move into the more light that comes into them, they see all teachings are the same. All roads lead to the divine. There's only one expression, and we're all a reflection of that. And when you get to that point, then you kind of embrace all teachings and say, wow, this is good stuff. I love it. So
Well,
it's a good place
Ben,
to. Yeah. Yes.
When you were talking, I think Audley said this, that when you're trying to climb a mountain, all roads lead to the top.
Right. And all of us, have our kingdom is shaped, and our bodies are shaped in different ways, and our past experiences, the trauma, the karma that we're working out, all those things affect what filters that we have, and how many passes we see in the basketball, how many dots we see, and how restricted we are, whether or not we stay only inside the confines of the 9 dots, or we can, like the guy says in the video, sometimes you don't need the people to get rid of the restrictions or try to do that. All you need to do is give them a bigger box and just say, The new restriction is you can go outside the little framework of your own mind, and you can experience the divine in all aspects of nature, in every form, from every teaching. And there doesn't need to be, I don't sense a fear, like if this teacher's, has one message and it's quite different. And it seemed really good until he started, messing around with young girls or young boys or, all those things. It's like, back to Audley, take the best and leave the rest. It's just like we all have our weaknesses and our strengths. We all fall down, we all make mistakes, but even the instruction, if you were given the fourth initiation, there was a story that was told about a teacher that, was kind of a rascal, but he knew a little bit, he was able to give just one silly little instruction: sit still and don't move until you know God. And that's all you need is to do that. It's that determination, that discipline, that dedication to want to know that makes the difference. And your devotion to the divine lets it come into you.
Ben?
Yes.
Yeah. A lot of the people that we know, good friends of ours now, that are going to see people, teachers, and a lot of the teaching that's out there now, we're hearing a lot of stuff about teaching from the heart, and it's confusing to me and a little concerning, because I know that it's not necessarily emotions, but to me, I always learned that, the heart center, the emotions are at the heart. And Audley never talked about that. Audley always talked about doing things from the top of the head.
Right.
And so I'm a little concerned about doing things from the heart. Would you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yeah, I'll talk a little bit. In the talk I'm going to do in a few weeks or a month or so is going to, I would say, dive more deeply into that. And it's a real good point, because I think, from my perspective, a lot of what Audley said, especially maybe more at different stages, in the early years in particular, and a little bit in the latter years that I was with him, it's just like the heart and below was a place that was taboo. This is how I perceived it, and
Right.
it's like there was kind of little cliques, we all had our little inside thing, you don't want to go down there, that kind of stuff. You have to stay
That's
up there,
messy.
or you're messy. And then the way that he had experienced the kingdom, and he saw, I'm seeing the same things when I go into myself, but he drew them out in two-dimensional form. And you can't show all these multiple folded dimensions and everything where it's all inside in a drawing. I mean, it's you have the paper and the pen, and so you have two dimensions to draw it. And so everybody was kind of spread out. I mean, there's a tendency to think the Godhead is somewhere, 2 or 3 feet above your head. And when you get into that, when I get into that, spaced out of my body, I'm truly a space cadet. And I remember one time Audley took a bunch of us to another spiritual group, and I knew one of the women there that was a gifted seer. And she said, we really like what this guy has to say, but, everybody here is out of their body, floating in the air. And she said, and you in particular, I was really kind of a space cadet in those days. And she said, when you walk through doors, your etheric or subtle body that is floating out of yourself, it would hit the top of the door. And she said, I thought it would hurt, but you seemed to just move right through it. And so there was a little tendency, maybe we were a little spaced out. And I've gone back and listened in some of the lectures or questions, he said, yeah, it's pretty much, these parts, the lower part of the kingdom, you just want to stay away from it. And because there are some challenges there, that part of the subtle kingdom, it really is the reflection for me of the second physical, the astral realms. And there are a lot of beings that inhabit those, or consciousness there, that, he always joked and said, if you can see them, they can see you, and you want to stay away from those guys. They can take your energy. And there are beautiful beings there, as well as darker forces. And so, it's a part of it. But when I see people coming and integrating completely, and for me, a lot of times there's a great emotional feeling from the heart, but the people that really have true integrity and truly have experienced the oneness, their heads just become filled with light, but they express it in a way that is just phenomenally powerful through the emotion center, and it touches other people. And I saw Audley one time, I was having lunch with him, and a friend of mine who was from India was there, and a couple other people, and I don't remember, but Audley, put on a show of energy or a show of light. And he was trying to, my friend from India was saying, basically, there's no way that an Okie could, know the God self. It's just like, I'm from India, we have the truth there, and we did. And Audley smiled and just, was making jokes and everything. And then he said, I can show you how it's experienced. And he comes down into his heart, and he kind of like in his picture of Jesus that he had drawn, and from that level, he radiates and just fills the whole place. My friend from India was sitting there speechless, and he was trying to be very aggressive beforehand, but the energy was so overwhelming and so powerful that he simply could not verbalize, what was going on. And that was Audley expressing through the heart. And he looked over at me and kind of winked and like, what's going on. And I thought, wow, this is cool. Then he moves up to the top of the head, and he fills the place with a white light that's just out of this world. And then he moves into the Godhead awareness, and it just like the place turns to silence. And my friend, he just sitting there, and he says, he was trying to speak, but he simply could not say words because the energy was so powerful. And I thought, this is an expression of how it truly is and how it truly expresses. And I think one thing to help understand and put all of the teachings in perspective, one thing that's helped me a lot is some of the work of Ken Wilber, who also was born in Oklahoma City in 1949. For those of you like me who were born there, and but anyway, his teaching, and especially one of his, it's an audio only program. It's called Cosmic Consciousness, KOSMIC, and it was done by Sounds True, Tammy Simons, and he discusses a lot of these things. And he said some of the misunderstanding or the challenges in the different traditions is that each one of these chakra centers has the components within it, or it expresses in different ways, like in the gross, the subtle, and the causal expression. And when you see someone that has the full illumination of the divine self and causally expressing through the heart, which Audley was doing, it is overwhelming. And there are some beautiful beings that do that. And then there are some that are pretty gross. I mean, they're expressing more of the physical. It usually has a lot of things tied to it, like they want money, or they want gifts, they want something in exchange for what they're going to, the precious teaching that they're going to give you. And so what I'll talk about in the other lectures is how to see some of these signs or flags and do that. But it really depends on what aspect of the heart the person is expressing from. If they're the causal expression of the heart, it's just phenomenal. If they're the subtle expression, it can have a lot of twinges and kind of funniness to it, but a lot of emotional, more of a lower emotional. And if they're in that with a great deal of power and simply expressing from their heart, it can be very powerful because it will affect others and people will feel it. But it may be from just a totally egotistical primary space. And so it's important not only to look at the centers, I think, but to also look at what's expressing through that. And that, and all of those, I mean, even the centers and the chakras and everything, it's really all in the top of the head. And then when it goes into Great Supreme, it vanishes into the oneness. And from there, it's just like there is no space at all. There's no time, there's no beginning, no end. There's no, it's the place where you can't die. It's the place that can't be burned by fire or wet by water and all those things it's talked about in many of the religious traditions. But does that help a little bit or make sense?
Yeah, sure it does. I think probably it brings back the importance of being able to discriminate the experience and know what's coming from the heart and what the source is.
Yeah.
maybe,
And
yeah.
that's why, as I kind of came to that awareness that you just verbalized over time, you know, Audley always talked about the 3 Ds: dedication, discipline, and devotion. And then for some reason, I got on a real kick of going back through Dr. Thinn's works and, you know, really trying to incorporate those more in my own awareness and knowledge. And he emphasizes discrimination, and a powerful mind is, you know, you move much more quickly if you can tell what's true and what's not. But that ability only comes from the causal expression. And it's what Audley would refer to in the upper kingdom drawings, the higher mind, the high intellect. From that level, there's no duality. So you can tell right from wrong. You know what to do. You can tell truth from falsehood. You know, all those things at that level. And then if you come out of that, it starts into duality, and you know, the Buddha and all that. And then you start having forms and visions and beings. And the ones that have an internal light, you see them in those subtle realms. The ones that don't are only in the physical.
So if it starts, excuse me, if it starts, I'm sorry, from a place of oneness, then it's going to be okay.
Yeah, if it's the causal expression. But that one of the things that Ken Wilber points out is that when you look at the chakra systems, it only makes sense to understand those in terms of each one of them has the 3 different expressions, you know, and it can express and be tied to the gross. And in that gross sense, you can actually take instruments and measure what meridian on the body that energy is coming from what vertebrae you know, it's tied to, and there's some physical form of energy, you know, some component on the body, and you can actually work on those. But that's a subtle expression. If you see psychically or see in the awareness in the subtle realm, and you see centers and chakras and all that, you're in the subtle realm. You're no longer in the gross realm. Now, most people, like for me, when I see them overlaid, and like most of the drawings that you see, they show a physical body, like Audley's drawings and Ledbetter's drawings and all those. You see a physical body, and then they've got these chakras out here floating in front of them or behind them or under them, you know, and all this stuff. Those are combining two different realms in one image. And so it doesn't make a great map, but it gets the point across. And that's just like spreading out the Great Supreme and all that. You can't show, there's no way to draw multiple dimensional objects, you know, in that way. And so, you know, it's like you need a map to get started, and that's a good one.
I think the talk about the gross and the subtle and the causal is something that I'm not real familiar with. I need to become much more fluent in those concepts to be able to understand this stuff better.
If you look at, like, Ken Wilber, I think from a Western perspective defines it very well. There are some other teachers that do. Shinzen Young, a beautiful book called Science of Enlightenment. A guy named John Yates or Chula Dasa. He's written several books on the Buddhist, the mindfulness, more of a Tibetan tradition. Shinzen Young is more of a Zen perspective, but they do very well in elucidating it. And then if you go back in Kriya Yoga, like there was one book that Audley gave me shortly after I met him. It was a little book called How to Know God. And it was one of the earliest English translations of the Yoga Sutras. And he said, you know, this is, you've studied philosophy, you'd probably like this. And he gives me a copy of it, you know, and I go through it and, you know, want to eat it before I'm done because it's so good. And it's one of my favorites, but it's one of the root texts in Kriya Yoga. It makes these distinctions very clearly, and it helped me to understand it. But all of the base scriptures, I couldn't make sense of some of it until I saw some of somebody from the West who had mastery of it, and they were able to explain it in a way that made sense to me. And so I've tried to incorporate those explanations in how I define what the kingdom is, how I define the different aspects of what we are. And when sometimes people say, well, how does that relate to what Audley's doing? I'm getting better at trying to make those correlates or correlations between his teaching and some of the others. And in some cases, the other language representation it's easier for me to understand. You know, it's all just words, but it's more in harmony with the education I had and my own background. And so it helps me to see his teaching in a much deeper and more clear way.
Well, thank you. I'll go try to find some Ken Wilber stuff to help
It's
me
tough.
out
A
there.
lot of
Thanks a
people,
lot, Ben.
you know, it's just like I recommend it to 100 people, and one comes back and said, no, boy, that stuff is just crazy. I didn't go very far. So I recommend the audio only program. It's audible.com, it's soundstrue.com, Amazon, you can buy it any place. It's called Cosmic Consciousness, KOSMIC, and it's an interview with Tammy Simons, the founder of the Sounds True organization, interviewing him, and she has a good mastery of the material and asks good questions, and he's just phenomenal in the explanations.
Thank you.
Okay.
So
Ben,
Yes.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
can you explain this? What do the colors represent?
Oh, the colors
And
don't
the shape.
represent anything. I was trying to do that in PowerPoint, and those were the closest colors I could get to what the Great Supreme looks like. But what I experience and see and I had a meditation one time long ago and I went to Audley afterwards, and when he first started really talking in detail about the oversoul or the soul pattern, you know, he talked about it. He took us in several of the classes and stuff into that level. But then one day when I was meditating on my own, I saw it in a way that was just like overwhelming. But in it, I was sitting there, and what he has drawn is in the drawing is way above the head. It was actually out around me, and instead of being vertically up above me, it was horizontal to my consciousness here. And I spent it seemed like hours exploring this because it was so cool, and all of the concentric rings that he shows in the soul pattern, the oversoul, or the Great Supreme, and he shows them as gold and blue, or a purple, deep purple color, and then fade into the blackness. What I saw was rings that had lots of little bitty segments in them. They were all divided up into little segments, and each one of the segments, if I had established consciousness and performance, and I knew how to ride a bicycle or do physical things, I was developed physically in a particular way, that would light up in my own soul pattern. It would become enlightened. It would be filled with light if I had developed conscious performance in that way. If I didn't have performance there, and I remember looking out over it, and there were a lot of them that were just completely black. It's just like, and I thought, that's strange. And when I kind of talked, and asked in myself, it said, well, the ones that don't have light, the ones that you think are black, that don't have self-illumination, you have not built performance there. And Audley listened to all of it when I went and explained it to him. And then he said, by the way, what percentage had light and what percentage was lacking light? And I said, wow. And I thought about it a second. I thought, oh, it's about 50-50. He says, fantastic. He says, that you're really there. He said, you have come to a point where enough of it is light that it's becoming self-conscious. You're becoming aware in your own soul. And
Wow.
It's powerful.
Yeah, that's great.
But anyway, I'm trying to draw some sketches, and I'm hoping somebody else can help and add to them and do that. And the color stuff, that I'm still exploring. It's just like some of the questions you asked last time about the colors of the rainbow and things like that, and why chakras are drawn. Like I have 10 drawings of chakras from different people, and only a few show the heart as golden. Most of them show it as green. And when I first began to wrestle with some of these, I'd go look at people, and I thought, generally it looks like it has something to do with the person's conscious development. And then when I went back and looked at some of the Ken Wilber information, I think his transformational or integral meditation, integral spiritual religion of tomorrow. There's several of his books, he talks about it. And he said, oh, the colors depend on whether it's a gross expression, a subtle expression, or a causal expression. And most people today in the world are still in the subtle expressions of consciousness. And so it's green. But if they move into the causal expression in the heart, it becomes radiant golden. And if you notice, even on Audley's drawing of the kingdom, there's direct lines that go from the heart into the Buddha. It's a direct line, a direct link. And that's why he saw it in that way, because he had full awareness in that level. And so he drew pictures and showed it as golden. And then, you know, you go back to all the traditional drawings from India or from most of the teachers, and it's green. And you know, so my mind, you know, I have OCD about trying to figure these things out. So I just keep going back into meditation to get information, to try to understand what it is in myself and the people that I see around me. And then as I contemplate or meditate on that, I begin to find documents or information from people that explain it from different levels. And I think, wow, man, whew, that really makes it more clear for me. And so I try to explain it. And you can see from my drawing, that one is kind of crude, unhatched. I'm working with some artists in Indonesia that are doing some of these, reproducing the drawings of Audley's Kingdom. A lot of his drawings, a lot of them I only have a picture where it was sitting on a tripod and somebody took it at an angle, and so it's not a real clear picture. So you know, I'm sending it to these people, and they're very good artists and produce digital artwork, and all those, you know, it's when one's completed, I post it on Facebook or on the Audle Allison OKC page, and we're going to put together a website. There's several of us working on it. A group of us met last weekend to try to formulate a plan for this, but all of the original artwork for these drawings will be uploaded, and anybody that wants can download them. And you know, and if you say, oh, I don't see the colors like that at all, if you have your Adobe editing tools, you'll be able to change the drawing and make it how you see it, how you perceive it, how you know it. And hopefully people will go into themselves, they will find what their kingdom is, and they'll share their story, because that's what Audley did. So, thank you.
So Steve, I have something.
Yeah.
This is an observation, and maybe this is only me. Okay, I'll preface that. I mean, I'm comfortable and have a good frame of reference for everything that you're talking about, because I've, you know, and other folks here, you know, I've been on the same path. But for me, I think you're going a little bit fast. And maybe I'm the only one. I mean, obviously you're well organized, it's well thought out, and you absolutely know what you're talking about. But for me, and maybe it's only me, I think you're going a bit too fast. That's
I would say that's probably true. I get excited about it, and you know, and I try to express it, and that's why I'm trying to make sure that they're recorded, and I know that some of the concepts are quite alien to what maybe Audley, how he may have described it, and they're much different in that sense. But for me, they add more clarity, and so I'm just sharing what comes from me. But it's true. I know, in working through some of these over the past 20 years or so, some of these concepts, like this distinction between gross, subtle, and causal, when I first read about it, I thought, sounds like bullshit to me, and it doesn't make any sense. And then I remember I gave a lecture and I talked about a little of it, and somebody said, well, how does that relate to what Audley says? And I thought, shit, I don't have any idea how it relates to what he said, but it was beginning to awaken in truth in me. And so I wrestled with it, worked with it, and after a few years, you know, it became more clear. And then as I got into it deeper and really started validating how it compared to what he said or what he drew or what he wrote, I thought, wow, you know, it just allowed me to experience it at a much deeper level. And part of the reason I go fast also is I feel we're all getting quite old, and we may not be here that much longer. And so we need to at least get the overview out, and we need to, excuse me, train younger teachers. It's real important. And I know some of the teachers are working with younger students, some of the teachers in Audley's tradition. If you look at the demographics of their group, you know, it's all people my age. We all have, you know, white hair, and, you know, we're 70 years old or more. And so, you know, even on a good day, we might have, you know, 20 more years that we could kind of expect. But it's more typically, you start getting to the average point, and just in the last 2 or 3 years, several of the really beautiful teachers and people, from our generation have departed. And it says by the time you get to be like 76, half of the men are gone, half of the women are gone by 78. And that's actually decreasing now because of some of the things that, pollution in the world and all that stuff. So it's important for us, I think for all of us, to take whatever our story is, whatever we can recall, we remember what we know and can validate within ourselves, to share it with others.
Ben,
A great
it was natural. It was organic. Audley didn't really try to address any one demographic, I don't think.
Right.
But it was very organic that he attracted to him really young people.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
something about him drew us,
Well,
to him. And he had older people there as well. I mean,
Yeah.
there was like no limit. It was a whole breadth of individuals. And I wonder what that was all about, because yes, our groups are for the most part older than what he attracted.
Well, some of it is when the last time I saw him, just a few days before he passed, I got to spend, like nearly the whole day with him and Pauline. We went to lunch, we went back, meditated for a few hours, did all kinds of stuff. But he in the end, he told me, he said, he had one regret about all of the stuff. And he said that no one was really ready. No, it's like the bread was in the oven, but it hadn't been baked. And he said, and it was clear some of the things he had an awareness that he was getting ready to depart. And he said, in time, you will teach and express. Well, I thought that's good. And then he said something quite interesting. He said, his regret is that he said, I was supposed to be the same age as you guys, and I was supposed to be here much longer. And he said, but when he had looked in his pattern before he came in for this life, he saw that Dr. Thin was already here, and Dr. Thin had planned to live much longer. Audley was going to spend the last 15 years, 20 years of his life driving him around the country for lectures. And then Dr. Thin had a heart attack and fell over dead in 1967. And it kind of left Audley in a very, initially in a very lost spot. But then two of the ladies that were also Dr. Thin's students kept encouraging Audley to, man, you got to teach. You're the only one who's had any experience, and who knows, the inner components, the subtle aspects, the causal aspects of the kingdom. And so he started teaching. And, and when I first went to a class at his home, there was me, these two elderly women, and then there were a couple of other people that were quite strange, but in the hippie generation, real long hair and stuff like that. And I think there were in total 6 people there, and one of them was Pauline. And in May, his mother-in-law was in the other room, and she had also been a student of Dr. Thin's, and and she encouraged him, but didn't participate in most of the classes. But he said the only reason he came early so that he could see Dr. Thin and get his awakening, so he would be able to teach. He said, if I had missed him, I would have missed everything. And, and if he had been our age, like in 1967, I was 17 years old, graduating from high school, and Dr. Thin departed the world. And so Audley had to be a little older. And he said he came in and he was in kind of this protected space. Like when he went to war, he ended up at Lake Banff in Canada, and, in British Columbia, he and Pauline were up there. It was more like a vacation than anything else, but there was a military contingency stationed there in case it was needed. But he was supposed to be our age. And so the demographics he attracted was all of us people that were tied to him and come into him. But then, he departed also. And so it's ready for, it's for us to carry on. And he always said, there's going to be a time when there's a great need for teachers. And he was trying everything he could to prepare as many teachers as possible. And, and some people really, got the message, and they've been out teaching a whole lot. And some, we had careers that were very active. We had families and all that. And then as that passes, then we start, teaching and expressing. So I think it's working, but I've had an intense awareness the last 2 or 3 years that to teach younger people and to share with them and to help them and encourage them, mentor them, and help them become the next generation.
So a little bit of a good news. One of the people that you're referring to that are teaching in our meditation family, there are children being born.
Oh yeah.
So we're going to have some parents to come back to. Okay.
Yeah. No, I think it's all good. The concern I have in the near term is especially what our country's been through, the isolation from the pandemic. I've seen it take a real toll on many people, and it's causing people to turn within. Some are turning within and turning on themselves. I have one friend that turned within, became very depressed, and took his own life. And so things like that, tragic things, but there's going to be lots of people at all age groups that have this hunger to know what they are. And, everybody needs to be sharing their story as, how they experienced it. And that's why I really appreciate when people respond on Facebook and tell their own story.
You're doing a wonderful job. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Yes.
Thanks for being here.
I never knew Audley. This is Sacra.
Yes.
And I am really appreciating the clarity that you're providing and the fact that you're recording these because you're actually going to be able to supply this to young people when they're ready.
Right.
And so that's one of the beauties to me of the situation that we're in is this kind of thing's happening and things are getting recorded. I would have never met you if this were not the case.
Yeah.
And I don't know how, one of the things that keeps coming to me is the power that you would have as a mentor, and all of you guys, everybody I see here who is an Audley student has the potential of being incredibly powerful mentors. And so how to connect you so that young people can actually have, like you were mentored by Audley. Yeah. That's one of the reasons it's so powerful is you actually were mentored.
Right.
So I don't know how to create that bridge, but
I think all we have to do is, I've spent a lot of time in meditation and contemplation about it. And all we have to do is put the message out. And in all the traditions, it's said, when the student is ready, a teacher appears. And there's so many students out there that have a hunger that there'll be lots of teachers. And they'll all express it from their own perspective. If they were a student of Audley, from how they incorporated or integrated his teaching into their life and how it manifests. If they're from another tradition, like the questions about Eckhart Tolle and various others, everybody will express it from their own soul. But when you get into that soul level, the one thing that I see more clearly each day, it seems like now, is that because the great supreme, which is the expression of all beings and all awareness and all consciousness, as it flows out, we're really, if you become one with that part of yourself, you become one with that. And when you're there, you're in touch with all beings, and all those paths, lead back. The trick is just to get people to realize that it's not a snake, it's just a rope. That their attention can be what drives them, in fear or in anger, in trauma, in hurt, in abandonment, all those things. It's just fixations in the mind. When you move past those, you can quickly move to liberation. And Audley always said, Yogananda said, all in the Kriya tradition, Dr. Than, if you practice this intently for 2 or 3 years, you can come to a great state of awareness and awakening. And I know we were crazy young people, and I kept saying, well, are we there yet? Are we there yet? It was kind of driving him mad. And he said, well, a little bit longer, it's just like you got to work through your karma. You got to, continue your practice. It's not like I have a magic wand and I can wave it over you and you're there. It's your development. The teacher provides maybe a small percentage of the energy and the motivation and the grace to hold the space.
Thank you.
Ben, Petros doesn't have a speaker, a microphone.
Yeah.
He wants me to ask you, what is beyond the causal realm?
The oneness. And and it's just that when you merge into that, there as far as I go, and I see all the things that are laid out, it's not like there's something more or there's something missing or there's some lack in that way. It's the full expression of the divine, and it's expressing in consciousness, and out of that expression all form arises. We're here, and we have a physical component, we have a subtle component, but there was a tendency I noticed in some of the teachers excuse me, as they express Audley's teaching, there's always something more. And there's not only just the beyond, but there's the beyond, the beyond, the beyond. It's paragate, gate, gate, paragate, parasam, gate. There's something more that you don't have yet. My experience increasingly is that if there's anything that I'm seeing, I'm not there. If there's any image or brothers or islands or bells or any of that stuff, those are all things that are expressions in the subtle realm and in the mind, and maybe the highest aspect of the mind, but you're not merged into your own soul or your own self, the higher self, the soul pattern, the great supreme, whatever. And it's just like the beginning of the universe. The question is, what happened before that? It's like those type of questions. They're really not appropriate for that expression. But there's a real tendency, and I know there's some teachers that say, well, we're going to have the next big thing. It's just like, reminds me of Steve Jobs in one of the Apple, product showcases. It's just like, everything's done, but we've got one more thing. And let me tell you about that. And I ask Audley about it a lot of times, because I would say, all those classes and what were kind of like the advanced classes and stuff, I said, they're good exercises for concentration and for my mind. But when I want to really grow into deep peace, I don't go to those exercises. I simply run the Kriya, center at the top of my head, go into what I know as the divine self, and then I can be at one and at peace with myself. And and there's when you get into that, it's completeness, fullness, no form, no expression, and it's I don't know, it's just like, I don't need anything more to know what I am. And so I think it's a little misleading. And I asked him about it, even on that last day that I referenced. I said, what about all these things? Should I focus on those or what? Because I always liked teaching beginning meditation and Kriya. I thought those were the things that I could personally verify really work. They could take you anywhere and in the tradition. And he said, well, he was concerned that if he didn't keep adding new episodes to the series, people would get bored and leave. And he said it's more important as the devotion grows and as you sit in the awareness, or you are one with the teacher through great love, great devotion, great teaching. It's staying around and keeping the mind focused on the teacher is what opens you to enlightenment. The more time that you spend in the presence of the teaching or the teacher, the more you are quickened or awakened to have that realization within yourself. And so if they go away, they forget about him. But if he makes it, a great new exciting story, people stay and they keep going. But some people are continuing to look for the next stage in the great story. And the next stage is like, there are no images, there is no form. If you really want to know the self, go in. Otherwise, you're in the subtle realms, you're in the mind, and you may have great, beautiful experiences, but they won't bring you the true peace from the oneness. Does that make sense? Or at least it's my perception of it.
So I'm hearing you say that if you want to use the word beyond the causal, you're really not using the word beyond the causal. It's more like an awareness of the unification of everything, the fact that it's not separated out. It is a whole oneness, unified field theory, whatever you want to call
I
it.
think it's a good way to think of it. But, you know, it's just like you know, beyond the great supreme, that is the full expression of all consciousness, and all thought, all form arises out of it. And as kind of a movement or a breathing out from that great supreme center of consciousness, center of awareness, as it hits certain levels, it becomes activated and it becomes a consciousness within itself. And I often think about it, it's like, you know, it's a poor analogy, but it's like sending out a space probe. You want to know what's going on in another world, maybe in the gross world, in the subtle world. And so the great supreme, as it has a desire to know itself and to love itself, it breathes out. And as that expresses and manifests in the various realms or various worlds, things take form. And the physical form is really a sense organ. It's like a satellite that we send to Mars, and we've got satellites that measure the temperature. We've got, sensors that measure the temperature. We have sensors that measure, is there any smell? Is there any gas? We analyze the soil. We do all sorts of things. And as we experience that, you know, we experience the world, and we don't have to be there. We actually have that experience and that expression in the world, but we're a sense organ. And the mind, the thing that I find was most helpful for me from the Kriya tradition is the mind itself. There's the low mind, and it's just what we think our likes and dislikes and our desires. And then there's the higher discriminatory mind, the high intellect. And from that mind, that level, it really can look on all of it. That mind is a sense organ that can see thought forms, that can see images in the subtle world. That's how we know it and express it and can draw images of it or can talk about it. And then you move beyond that and into the true causal oneness. And there is no beyond, you know, it's just like it's all inclusive. That's part of what it means. It's all being, all awareness, all expression. And that expression is what we're trying to get to. And as you begin to disassociate with your body and thinking, I'm just I'm just Ben sitting here in a meat suit, you begin to identify with the divine self, and you begin to identify with the oneness. And all of a sudden, you know, the physical form has less, and you truly have a revitalization, an intense energy, an appreciation, a fearlessness to approach life and to share it in a way that's relevant for you. And I think we've kind of gone time limit for even beyond. So
Yeah, I think we've reached a 2 hour 2 hours on online here. So are you wanting to wrap this up and kind of give us a little bit of a preview, coming attraction of what your next talk is going to be about?
yeah, I think what I had on for the next one was about the teacher and the role of the teacher, the role of the guru, you know, and how that expresses. And it's probably a good place to do it. And then, you know, if people have questions, you know, send them to me or send them to Connie. You know, I'm happy to, you know, to do things. And if it's going too fast, you know, I can slow it down. It's interesting. Some people have said, like, when I do a beginning meditation online, I go too slow. I have trouble concentrating. And so I've been trying to speed things up and do some additional things, you know. So it's just like, well, we all need to learn something and need to express. But I think the next will be more in that line, and then continuing to expand as on a lot of these others. And in a sense, it's going back over the same material, but it's adding a new layer of depth. And the most important thing is not just the information or the drawings or the, you know, the book that you can carry around and hug close to your heart, but it's what you can awaken to within yourself. And if you don't awaken to the divine part of yourself that, you know, you sleep with every night, you know, in your deep dream, you're there back in that state of oneness, and you bring that back into consciousness. If it doesn't come back into consciousness for you, then there's usually fear or something that's holding you back. And we want to try to address those and in time and help people clear them away so that, you know, it becomes easier. And you just realize, you know, hell, I'm just sitting here. I'm expressing in the gross form, subtle form and the causal realm, and when I can identify with the physical or the gross level and identify with that spiritual center of what I am, then I'm there. You know, there's nowhere you need to go. There's not a path, a journey, anything. It's you're there. You are an expression of the great supreme or the divine, but you're mistaken in your identity. You think you're a physical form. Oh, it hurts here, it hurts there. And there's a
So
way.
Ben, do you
Yeah.
see this happening in 2 weeks again? Is this going to be kind of a pretty regular?
Connie and I have talked about, my schedule works well with that and hers does. So, you know, every couple of weeks, and sometimes, you know, if it's a holiday or stuff like that, you know, we'll probably be more flexible. And, but she's very good. Thank God she's very good at organizing things and posting them and, you know, getting the message out. I'm not so good at that. And if it weren't for somebody kind of staying on me and saying, can't you, you know, what are you going to talk about? So I don't know. I didn't think about it. And then I go into a meditation and I say, what would be the best thing that I could express right now that might help someone, or that
Well,
I
can tell you that Mary's really jealous because she's got her schedule filled out 2 weeks ahead of time. So I get to watch this and she doesn't. But if I let her know soon, she'll probably be able to clear for 2 weeks out.
Yeah.
So,
and this time, you know, it was done primarily because there were some of the people that Connie was working with that were on the East Coast. And, you know, if we did something like in the evening, which is sometimes easier for everybody, you know, but my 7 in the evening, or, you know, is 9 o'clock
sure.
and almost 10 o'clock on the East Coast. So this is something that works, and, you know, I can make it work in my schedule. And since they're recorded, I don't know that it matters what time.
Yeah.
People can reach out anytime and we can talk.
Yeah, she can make it work. She just needs a little notice ahead of time. And I think 2 weeks is reasonable. So
yeah.
Yeah, so we'll come back here, same time, same place, 2 weeks from now.
excellent.
Answer any questions that didn't get answered this time. We just have to, you know, kind of set a time frame around it, you know, because there are people, you know, that did have to bail for one reason or another that might want to hear the next question that's, you know, coming up. So, so I'm gonna stop the recording now.
Okay.